Sometimes life is messy. Have you ever wished you could refocus your mind, home, relationships, and work life? Join us as we use research-based information to make practical changes and simplify life. This is Life Simplified.
Welcome back to Life Simplified. If you listened last week, you know that this month is all about bridging generations, learning how best to connect and communicate with people in our life that are from a different generation, or maybe even opposite ends of the same generation. As a reminder, we'll go through and just tell you what generation each of us fall in before we dive into today's topic. So, I am a millennial.
I am also a millennial, but I identify as an older millennial because I'm a cusper. So just say I'm real close to Gen X.
So I was thinking about that and I was like, is the term elder millennial? Is that what the term is?
You know, that's what I hear people saying, and I guess that could be offensive, but since I identify as one, I'm going to identify myself as an elder millennial, or there's a made-up word that's a zennial, which is that Gen X millennial cuspers, which is where I live my life. So you can either call me an older millennial or a zennial, and I will be okay with that.
Okay, well, I'm the same then.
And so I'm the same as well. I'll go with zennial. That way the older part isn't really in there. Because, you know.
Yeah. Take the elder out.
Yeah, take the elder out.
For myself, I'm a Generation X. So, but I'm on the, top half of it, I guess, to going into the millennium. So,
I mean, you could be a zennial too,
right?
Yeah.
You're on the end of the Gen X, and we're on the beginning of the millennials. So.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's awesome that we left off with Joni, because today's topic is Gen X. So I expect to hear a lot from her.
Oh, I don't know about all that.
All right. So this week we are diving into Gen X, and that consists of those born between 1965 and 1980. So thinking about that as we're going through, can you think of someone in your life who is from Gen X?
Me.
We can all think of Joni. My husband's Gen X.
Yeah, so many people. My sister-in-law's Gen X, lots of friends. I mean, just so close. Lots of Gen Xers in my life.
As with all the generations, there are characteristics that are kind of typical of those born during this time period. Now, does that mean that everyone is going to experience the same things in the same way? No. But when you're thinking about Gen X, what do you think about?
I think of really independent, because I think this is the generation where the term latchkey kid kind of started, because this was really the first generation, I think, that both parents were working outside of the house. And so there's a lot more time spent at home alone and being a little more independent in those ways. And so that is really the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think Gen X.
I think about, both parents having to work. Mm-hmm. I know growing up, my parents had to work too, but I really think that's what really comes to my mind, is that both parents had to be out in the workforce instead of the mother staying home with the children or the father staying home with their children. But it's one thing that really comes to my mind.
So what about the technology in your, was it kind of introduced?
Yeah, it was really introduced during my time in that.
So you've seen it evolve a lot.
Absolutely.
Where we were more we're in it. We were born in it. Some transitions, but it was always been there.
I remember the first cell phone. So, and I joke and kid around about the bag phone.
My dad had one of those.
Yeah, my parents did too.
I did too. Yep. My mom's like, you can't get it, but if you get it, you have to pay for it yourself. And I did. I mean, but it was a cute little bag phone, and it plugged into the cigarette lighter.
Yes. That doesn't exist anymore.
It does not exist anymore. Then I think about the different computers, like the different computer screens, because I mean, it was a big old tube, compared to now they're really thin and skinny. I still have issues learned with some technology, and my kids have to pull me out, or somebody that's a lot younger than me that can help me. So
they had the floppy disks
yes.
and the DOS
oh my gosh,
systems,
yes.
like totally different. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, so this was the time when all of the technology was really starting. So I love that you mentioned the bag phone. We had a bag phone too. And I remember dial-up internet.
Yes.
So
the worst. Absolutely the worst.
I mean, I'm still angry about the dial-up internet because I had some front row tickets to a concert that I was super excited about. And before I could check out, somebody called. Somebody called you. It cut you out. And I was like... I'm still scarred from that.
I forgot all about that.
Yeah, just like kicked you off.
Yeah, you'd be like, do not call me. I'm trying to be on something, but I don't need you to call and knock me off of my internet. Oh my gosh, you can still hear the sound.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want to demonstrate that sound?
I think I won't, just for all our listeners.
Well, Joni may, since this is her.
No, that's okay.
No demonstration.
I mean, it's
No
tempting,
demonstration.
but we're not gonna.
You know what it sounds like.
Maybe we can input a sound in here. Can we put a little sound
I
bite
don't know.
in?
We'll try. Yes, this was the time of the emerging technology. So computers and fax machines and email were becoming more common. And
Pagers.
I was going to say we're beepers in this. Or pagers, I guess,
Same
is
thing,
the same. I just beepers.
Which is,
I
if you
remember
think about
that.
it, so ridiculous because you really couldn't do anything with it but know that you needed to find a phone to call somebody. It didn't actually do anything but be like, yo, call me.
Okay, so I have a question for you. When y'all was in high school, did you have to take a typing test or a typing class?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
And the first half was on a typewriter and the second half we had a computer. So we did both, but yeah, I still had the correction tape and the whole timed how many words per minute.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mine was elementary
Oh, really?
when I had to do that. Yeah. Sorry.
this elder millennial over here.
But I was not on a typewriter.
I
was
don't
on a
think she's as
computer.
elder as some of us in the room.
I don't think so.
So I had to have a business class, but it was for typewriters.
Yes.
And we'd have to do the typewriter test, but it was timed to see how fast you could.
And how many mistakes.
And how many
Yeah.
minutes and everything. So that's weird that what you guys went through compare. And we're not that different in age either. So
It was just the transition because we did both because they knew computers were on the rise, but typewriters were still pretty common. So yeah, we were, that cross. See, the cuspers, we were in the middle of
Exactly.
typewriters and computers.
which we still had a computer class, but it's just we also had to take that, a typewriter class or whatever. So that's interesting.
Yes, and that is a lot of people in Gen X saw that transition at work between going from the typewriter to a computer. And like you mentioned, they were giant computers and there was one big computer. And then they also even saw the advancement of personal computers so that they got a little smaller and everyone had one at their desk.
I haven't looked in a while, but do you guys still have the typewriter sitting on the desk out front here? Because I remember when I started, there was a great big old typewriter sitting on the desk, and you would have to go in there and use it for certain forms and that.
Yeah.
And I've been with Extension 17 years, so it's funny to see that transition also in the workplace.
Yeah, we still had one at our office too. I don't know if
Yeah.
there's a certain extension form they still had to use because it was there for the first several years. It's gone now. I don't know. We finally were we're not using this.
And you think a lot of it was too is that you couldn't fill in the stuff on, on the computer.
Yeah.
You couldn't fill in them
That's
forms.
right.
And that has now evolved because you used to have to print them off and then typewrite it in but now you can do, you can use the computer to fill them in.
yes,
So
thank you,
that's-
fillable PDFs.
Absolutely.
Yes. And to answer your question, no, the typewriter is not still
It's
there.
not
Now,
there.
whether or not it's in this office, it might be. But I remember it when I interned here
Yeah.
many, many years ago. I've been here 11 years, but even before that, I remember using the typewriter.
And I think you interned maybe a couple of years before I started here.
I think so.
So is this the generation that had the slides?
They saw the transition, yes. So this was a big generation of transition. So yes, they had the slides and the overhead projectors.
I remember
and
in
they
school the overhead
projectors.
clear.
Yeah,
Yes.
you had the pins, and if you used the wrong one, you just ruined it. It was done.
They saw the transition to PowerPoint and the computer at every desk, like I mentioned. So yes, they had the slides. This is also the time where they were the first to experience technology as a form of communication. So using the instant messenger and chat rooms and going to the web, going to the web for answers. This generation typically shows a tendency to embrace this new technology, but not just jumping in immediately and just being like, okay, yeah, I'll do all the new trends. They want to really look at it first and evaluate it before they decide on it.
Yeah, got to make sure that all the little flaws and everything's, bugged out of it. I would have to say for myself personally, I've always been pretty tech savvy with everything. So I was excited with the new technology and the change of everything. Now, as I get older, I don't know so much. But just for instance, I had to get a new cell phone the other day, and I haven't had an Apple phone in forever. Not promoting them, but my kids finally talked me into going back to an Apple phone. Having the different technologies that involve the way that they have throughout the years, it's interesting to see. And some people don't like that new technology of everything, but as a Generation X, I do remember that, I wanted the bag phone whenever it came out. I wanted the new computer. So just seeing the different things.
And this is something interesting about this generation. They are kind of known as the sandwich generation because many of them, about 47% actually, have a baby boomer parent.
Yep.
And have either raised or are raising a millennial or Gen Z child.
I've got 3 Gen Zs. So I am raising Gen Zs, but I was raised by the silence generation. So, which I think they're kind of close to the boomer age, but they are in the silence.
So that just shows that not everyone is going to be the same. We're just talking generally here.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, I identify so much with Gen X that almost am I really a millennial? Because all of these things I remember being at the older end of the millennial spectrum. And my parents are baby boomers, and 2 of my 3 children are Gen Z. So I'm I really, really identify with all of these kind of key things with Gen X.
And another thing is the economy, of how it has changed too. I know it changes every generation and every year and everything, but just knowing that things was a lot tougher, back then it was whenever I was growing up with my parents, just seeing how difficult trying to get your foot in a door for a certain career or job. And it was just a little more difficult than I think it is now.
Based on the information that we've just been kind of talking about and thinking about the Gen Xers in your life, what do you think would be their preferred method of communication?
I want to hear from y'all before I decide what I'm going to do.
She wants to know what our guess is before she tells us what the answer is.
Honestly, I already know what y'all's is.
Our preferred method?
Yes. I'm almost positive I know what y'all's are.
Yeah, I know. Well, I know what my preferred is too, and I don't know,
But let's get in the mindset of Gen X.
But I feel like a Gen Xer, so I'm that is what they think.
All right, well, tell us.
Okay, I don't want to talk to people. I mean, I do, but not all. Okay, that sounds terrible. I like to talk to people, but if you just need to ask me a question, or if I just need some info for something, I don't really want you to call me. Shoot me a text or an email so that I can get back to you when I have the moment to get back to you. And so it's quick, to the point.
It's email. It's either email or text for this generation. I think some of them do like talking on the phone. Like if it's something like complicated to either put in an email that you need to explain,
Right.
you know, is one thing. That's a phone call. But most of the time it's going to be an email or a text. But it's probably going to be more so an email because the text with the cell phones hasn't, you know, really evolved during that time either. It's more closer to far as the millennium time. So
Yes, that is what the research shows, that mostly email or a text. And Tiffany mentioned a very key point there: short, to the point. Not a whole lot of explanation. Just tell me what I need to know, why I need to know it, and let's move on. They typically tend to prefer those short and informal conversations.
Right. And I think like I can identify with what Joni said. If it's a lot of information, clearly let's don't type each other a book. We don't want to do that. But if it's just a little bit of information, let's just get it done. Because when I think of this generation and I think of how I identify with this generation, it's that I don't want to have a meeting for something that could be a memo or an email. But if there's a significant issue we need to hash out, then let's, yes, by all means, meet in person.
So I'm sitting here laughing because I think about my husband. My husband is closer to the boomer / Gen X, you know, type thing. And he'd rather talk to you. He does not like texting. He has got a little bit better just because that's how the kids communicate a lot. He'd rather just have that face-to-face conversation. He's like, why don't you just call him instead of texting them, you know, type thing. So I'm sitting here laughing because we are both Gen X, but we are completely opposite with that. Just because you're maybe in the same generation doesn't mean that you see the same thing. So
Exactly. And I did put out a question on social media before recording this podcast and just ask the question of those in the Gen X generation and to see what their preferred method of communication. And we'll go through some other questions here in just a minute too. And by and large, it was texting, but I did have a few that would say I would rather talk face to face or have a phone conversation. So I think the takeaway there is to know your audience, know who you're talking to, and know what they prefer. Where do you think that Gen Xers go to get information on a new topic?
I would think the internet, just general, just because they were in that transition age. So growing up with that resource.
Let's Google it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Google it. Yes.
Okay, so we didn't have the internet or any of that whenever I was like, when I was starting to grow up in that. So we had the encyclopedias at home. And like that's where we got information about certain things. I don't know if y'all remember them or if you even had them at home, but the people would go by selling these big old
Britannica.
Yes,
Oh
I
my
remember
gosh.
them knocking on the
Yes.
door with all these books.
Yes.
And they were expensive.
So
like
I-
if you had a good
Yep.
set, like your parents, they spent some money.
So I remember lots of times if I'd having to do research for school, I would have to go use them and pull up like what this was. And I did not have the resources to have the internet at my house growing up. So that's where I had to get my information was from these books. So
And just think like they got outdated after a while because the information, it took so long to write it. And then you bought it. And then they're like, we got
It's
a
already-
new one coming out. And you're like, I don't have that information.
yep,
So now, where do you go to get information?
the internet.
The internet. And that's typically what most of the people that I surveyed said as well, that they go to the internet. But I remember the encyclopedias too, and going to the library to look up the information. This could have several different answers, and there were several different answers on my survey as well. I think it probably really depends on what age a person was when these events happened, but what might be one of or a defining event of this generation? So we're thinking 1965 to 1980.
The Challenger blowing up. That was one of the big things that I remember. There's lots of things that I remember but that's one of the ones that has really like stuck because we was watching it on television. I was at the Fredonia elementary school when it was still open, and I remember watching that. Man, that was just very devastating as to me as a child then. But like I said, there's been other things that's happened through my generation as well.
That was the first thing that my husband said, and he described it like that as well, that he remembers watching it and seeing it happen.
When I think about Gen X and like significant things and more on like a pop culture aspect, and because it's kind of making a comeback, I think of MTV. You know, like it going on the air and like the first music videos. And I think it first came on air like right before I was born. So I remember my entire life with MTV, but I know like that was the pivotal moment when like there weren't music videos. That wasn't a thing. And I feel like that became very iconic for teenagers at that point. And now you see teenagers and the Gen Zs wearing the MTV shirts and the logo is everywhere. And so I think that definitely made an impact on probably early millennials, but definitely because the Gen Xers were already that age at that point, that was probably impactful in a cultural aspect.
I remember the MTV thing too, because we didn't have any type of satellite. We had just like the rotary type antenna. I was so upset at my parents because whenever I moved out, they ended up getting satellite to be able to watch TV and that. And I remember I thought, that's nice. Now I can watch MTV, but I didn't live there anymore. Yeah. So.
And along that generation is when cable TV really started to become more accessible. So, and I remember not having it either and really, had the 3 different channels, and I really wanted to watch all of those things, but I couldn't watch any of them.
I watched a lot of MTV. We did always have cable. Now, I didn't necessarily like in my room where I could just watch whatever I wanted to, but I watched a lot of it. I watched a lot of television, and that definitely was something that was on the top of the things that were on the television at that point.
Both of those things were mentioned in the survey, and there's lots of events that took place during this time that could be a defining event. But some of the ones mentioned on my social media post, the Berlin Wall coming down and the AIDS epidemic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The advancement of technology. That was a big event, and it just keeps going and going and going. The illegal drug surge and the effects that had on society. Some others mentioned terrorism at Munich Olympics, space exploration, tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, corporate layoffs, Iranian hostage crisis, the Exxon Valdez oil tanker spill.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Uh-huh.
And there's many more. There's no way I could list all of the defining moments. So we would love to hear from you as well, listeners. If you are in Gen X when this episode airs, please post on our social media and let us know what your defining moment was or what method of communication you prefer. We also asked whether or not someone felt like they could communicate more effectively or relate to the generation before them or after them. And so that would be baby boomers or millennials. And honestly, that was really kind of split down the middle. And this is just me thinking out loud. I don't necessarily have any research to back this up, but I wonder if it has something to do with where you were born in that generation. I mean, Tiffany and I've talked, well, she has mentioned, I don't know if I've mentioned it, but I can relate to Gen X a lot because I'm right there on the edge. And I wonder if that has something to do with it. What do you think, Joni?
It probably is. I mean, because it's so close to, whenever you guys was born in that. And so you're still seeing the after effects of it, the things that happen, closer to the time period where it switched to generations and that. So, and that's probably why I also identify with, the millennials, because I'm right there as well.
My husband said he relates more to the millennials because he married one, so he thought that's what he should say.
That's funny.
I said, oh, okay.
No.
I think too, it's like, it depends on it. There's common ground. So if you're an older Gen Xer, you experienced a lot of the same big events and technology that the baby boomers would have. And if you are a younger Gen Xer, you were there for a lot of the big events and things that, the earlier millennials experienced. So you have that common ground. Like, I think about the four of us in this room, we have a lot of similar memories, even though some of us are a little bit older, some of us are a little bit younger, but we're all right within that span where the really big things we all kind of remember, and so you can relate to those generations when you're on those edges. And I think too, if you think about it, if you are a younger Gen Xer, the boomers are probably your parents, and sometimes you're like, oh, my parents, we struggle with that. And so the one, the generation below you may be easier, or vice versa. I think it just really depends, because probably I would say most of the older Gen Xers, their parents were probably silent generation for the most part.
Yeah.
And so the baby boomers wouldn't have been their parents. They still would have been their peers. And so I think you think about your peers, and that's who you're able to relate to a little bit easier.
That makes a lot of sense. So when we're thinking about communicating across the generations, I think I mentioned this earlier, but it's important not to assume. So don't assume that just because someone is in Gen X that they want to be talked to a certain way. Get to know them as a person before you just assume how they want to communicate.
Yeah, I think personality will matter a lot too. I mean, I think your generation and your experiences and big events, but everybody's personality is so different that you can't just lump everybody together.
And then consider the time and the place for addressing whether it's an issue, whether it's just something you want to ask real quick, if it's something that's not going to take very long. Just consider what you are asking. And then be willing to learn. We all are learning something new every day. There is emerging technology all the time. And sometimes we kind of get set in our ways. I know that I can be that way. And we have to be willing to learn to communicate in another way that may not be as comfortable as what we would like. And then to communicate specifically with those in Generation X, think how you can take the pressure off of them, because they've grown up with a lot of pressure. So rather than just going in and being like, hey, I need you to do this, maybe when you're asking them to do a task, let them know what kind of resources are available to help with that task, not just, I need you to do this and I need you to do this right now. Which, I mean, I think that sounds good for all the generations. But then also I'm pretty close to that Gen X. So maybe that's why I think that. I've really enjoyed this discussion about bridging the generations, and I'm looking forward to our next episodes where we will discuss millennials as well as Gen Z. So stay tuned over the next couple of weeks. This is Life Simplified.
Thanks for listening to Life Simplified. We are family and consumer sciences agents with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. Contact us at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.